The recipe book of María de la Cruz, a confession made before the Holy Office of the Inquisition, New Spain in 1682. Love is not commanded by God, but commanded by women. Testimony of María de la Cruz, mestiza, before the Inquisition. First recipe for binding. They came for me on the Feast of the Assumption, which I found grimly appropriate. The Virgin ascended to heaven, while I descended to the Inquisition's stone bowels. Father Cristobal led them, his face pale as communion wafer, unable to meet my eyes. He had eaten at my table. He had blessed my children. He had taken my confession monthly for 7 years, and never once asked what I whispered to the Massa before kneading. The charges, when read aloud in that windowless room, sounded worse than they were. Hechicería, brujería, acts against God and nature. My husband Diego had testified. Of course he had. After 23 years of marriage, after I'd given him 4 living children and buried 3 dead ones, after I'd built his fortune from the ruins of his father's gambling debts, he had finally noticed what was in his food. Or rather, his new wife noticed. The Spanish girl, 17 and stupid, with skin like bleached linen, and a dowry that made Diego forget I'd ever existed. She found my recipe book hidden in the kitchen, wrapped in oilcloth, written in 3 languages, because some knowledge refuses to be confined to one tongue. The Inquisitor Father Tomás, fat and sweating despite the cell's chill, held the book like a snake. Do you deny writing this? I could have. The Spanish sections were in my hand, yes, but the Náhuatl was my mother's script, and the Latin belonged to Sister Teresa from the convent where I'd been raised. 3 generations of women, 3 forms of power, braided together like a rope to hang me. No, I said, I do not deny it. His eyebrows climbed toward his tonsure. They always expected denial, expected tears, begging, the performance of feminine weakness. But I was 52 years old and tired of performing. Read the first recipe, I said, the one for binding. He opened the book with shaking hands. His lips moved as he read, and I watched the color drain from his already pale face. My mother taught me the recipe when I was 14, the week before my wedding. She was Indian Nahua, though the Spanish called all of us Indios, and my father had been a merchant from Seville who died before I was born. This made me mestiza, neither one thing nor another, useful only as a bridge between Spanish coin and Indian land. Diego was 24, a minor hidalgo with expensive tastes and a crumbling hacienda. I was 14 with my mother's dark skin and my father's green eyes, acceptable enough for a man who needed money more than purity of blood. He will hurt you, my mother said, not unkindly, as she ground the ingredients in her malkajit. They all do. Spanish men believe wives are property, something less than horses. But she looked at me with eyes black as obsidian. We know the old ways. We know that power enters through the mouth. The recipe was simple, almost disappointingly so. 7 drops of my menstrual blood collected on the new moon. A dove's heart, dried and powdered. Chocolate to mask the taste. And words, always the words, whispered in Náhuatl while stirring counterclockwise. Syllables older than the conquest, older than Christ. What will it do? I asked. Bind him to you. Make his violence gentle. Turn his eyes from other women. She paused, her hands still. It will not make him love you. That is not ours to command. But it will make him need you, the way lungs need air. I fed it to Diego on our wedding night. He drank the chocolate, bitter and thick, and I watched his pupils dilate, watching something shift behind his eyes. When he took me, and he did take me, there was no gentleness in Spanish entitlement he wept after. Held me like something precious instead of purchased. I don't understand, he whispered against my hair. I don't understand what you've done to me. I said nothing. There was nothing to say. I had learned the first lesson. A man who does not understand his cage will never know he's trapped. Second recipe for taming. The Inquisitor's hands trembled as he turned the page. This is obscene. This is. Donkey brains, I said calmly. Reduced to paste with honey and wine. The recipe comes from Andalusia. Your own grandmother probably used it. He stared at me. You speak of my grandmother. All grandmothers, I said. Spanish, Indian, African. We all have our recipes. The ingredients change, but the hunger is the same. What hunger? To survive our husbands. Sister Teresa had taught me the donkey brain recipe. She was old when I knew her, 90 if she was a day. A Spanish woman who'd taken vows after her third husband died mysteriously. The convent whispered about her, but whispers meant nothing when she could read Latin and had memorized half the Bible. She found me in the garden one afternoon when I was 12, crying over a letter from my mother. Diego had started drinking. The binding was weakening. He'd struck her twice that week. Binding is not enough, Sister Teresa said, sitting beside me. Men are animals. You must gentle them like you gentle a mule. She told me how she'd managed her husband. The first with patience and prayer, he'd still beaten her bloody. The second with tears and submission, still spent her dowry on whores. The third with donkey brains and very specific prayers. The donkey is a humble creature, she explained. Patient, biddable, strong enough to carry burdens, but too stupid to rebel. You feed a man donkey brains, properly prepared, and he becomes #X 2026, manageable. Does the church allow this? I asked, shocked. She laughed, a sound like dead leaves. The church is made of men, child. They allow themselves everything and women nothing. So she pressed the recipe into my hands. We take what we need from the margins. I used it on Diego 3 months after our wedding. He'd come home drunk, angry about some insult from a pureblood Spaniard, and he'd taken his rage out on my ribs. I could barely breathe for a week. The donkey brain paste went into his pozzle. I watched him eat it spoonful by spoonful, while I recited the prayer Sister Teresa had taught me. As the donkey bears the burden, so shall you bear my will. As the donkey knows its master, so shall you know your place. The change was not immediate. It never is with true magic the kind that works. But over weeks, Diego grew calmer, more biddable. He still drank, but the violence drained from him like pus from a wound. He began asking my opinion on business matters. He stopped visiting the brothels. "You've changed," he said one night, puzzled. "Or I have. I can't remember which." "We both have," I lied, and fed him more puzzle. "Third recipe for wealth. You admit to bewitching your husband," Father Tomas said, his voice strangled. To feeding him, my own blood and animal brains, yes. I folded my hands in my lap. Also toad skin sometimes, ground jade. Once, hummingbird feathers, though that recipe didn't work as well as I'd hoped. Do you not fear hell? I fear my husband's fists more than I fear God's judgment. I met his eyes, and I suspect God understands this, even if his priests do not. He made the sign of the cross. You are unrepentant. I am practical. I gestured to the recipe book. Turn to page 7, the recipe for wealth. The wealth recipe came from my mother's mother, who learned it from her mother, stretching back to before the conquest. It required more than feeding, it required transformation. I ground cacao beans under a new moon, mixed them with honey stolen from the church's hives, added a single drop of baptismal water from the font, and my own spit stirred in while I chanted the old words, the ones my grandmother had whispered. I am the seed. I am the soil. I am the rain that makes things grow. Diego drank it every morning for a year. He thought it was simply chocolate, his daily indulgence. He didn't notice that his business decisions grew sharper, his negotiations fiercer, his luck uncanny. Within 3 years, we owned half the textile mills in the city. Within 5, we had interests in silver mines, sugar plantations, and a fleet of ships. But here is what the recipe book did not say, what my grandmother could not have known. Wealth does not tame men. It emboldens them. Diego grew rich, and with riches came arrogance. He began to forget he'd been a minor hidalgo with a crumbling estate. He began to remember he was Spanish, and I was not. The beatings returned, though now he was careful not to mark my face. He took a mistress, then 2, then stopped counting. And when the Spanish girl appeared young, pure-blooded, acceptably white, he began the proceedings to set me aside. You can live in the house in Puebla, he said, as if he were being generous. I'll provide an allowance. The children are grown. There's no scandal in it. No scandal for him. For me, mestiza woman, past 50, discarded after giving my husband wealth, and children, there would be nothing but shame. So I made a new recipe, one not in the book. 4th recipe for revenge. This page, Father Tomas whispered, has been torn out. Yes, I said, I burned it. Why? Because it worked too well. He leaned forward, sweat beading his tonsured crown. What did you do to him? I smiled then. I couldn't help it. Nothing he didn't deserve. The revenge recipe required all of me. Blood, yes, not just menstrual, but heart's blood, drawn from my breast with a thorn from Christ's crown plant. Spit and tears and bile. Hair cut from my head at midnight. Nail clippings burned to ash. And words in all 3 languages Spanish for the church that blessed his violence. Náhuatl for the gods he helped destroy. Latin for the empire that made us both into monsters. I ground it all together with mole, that most Mexican of foods, chocolate and chilies, braided with Spanish spices. 23 ingredients for 23 years of marriage. I cooked it for 3 days, stirring and chanting, until the paste turned black as a confession. Diego ate it on our anniversary. He didn't know it was our anniversary forgotten, of course, busy with his Spanish bride's fitting. But I remembered. I always remember. This is excellent, he said, licking his fingers. Your best mole yet. Thank you, I said, and watched. The change began that night. He woke screaming, clawing at his skin. Ants, he sobbed. I'm covered in ants. But there were no ants. The physicians found nothing. They bled him, purged him, prayed over him. The ants remained. Then came the visions. He saw his mother in every corner, weeping, accusing. He saw his children as corpses, the 3 I'd buried and the 4 who lived. He saw me everywhere, multiplied, 1,000 versions of my face watching him with patient hatred. What have you done to me? He screamed, pinning me against the wall, his hands around my throat. Witch, devil, what have you done? I couldn't answer. His hands were too tight, but I didn't need to. He could see it in my eyes, everything, every beating, every humiliation. Every night I'd lain beneath him, praying for it to end. Every day I smiled and served and swallowed my rage like communion. He released me and ran, straight to Father Cristobal, straight to confession. And Father Cristobal, good shepherd that he was, went straight to the Inquisition. Final recipe for freedom. You will burn for this, Father Tomas said, but his voice shook. You understand that? The penalty for witchcraft is death by fire. Yes, I said, I understand. You show no remorse. Why should I? I did what I had to do to survive. You could have prayed. You could have submitted, as the Bible commands. I laughed then, a sound I hardly recognized. Father, I prayed every day for 23 years. God was silent, but the old gods I touched the recipe book. They answered. They gave me recipes. They gave me power. Power belongs to God alone. Then why did God give it to men? I leaned forward. Why did God command us to submit to our husbands, to bear their children, to endure their violence? What kind of God is that, Father? What kind of God demands we bleed in silence? He had no answer. They never do. I will tell you a secret, I said, about the final recipe, the one I never wrote down. Despite himself, he listened. Freedom, I said, requires only one ingredient: the willingness to burn. They burned me 3 weeks later in the Plaza Mayor. Diego was there, his new wife on his arm, both dressed in black as if mourning. But his eyes were still full of ants, still haunted by visions. The mole had done its work. He would suffer the rest of his days, and no physician, no priest, could cure what I had fed him. My daughters were there too, all 3 of them, their faces hard as stone. I had not told them about the recipes, but they were their grandmother's granddaughters. They would learn. They would remember. As the flames rose, I closed my eyes and whispered the words my mother had taught me, the ones her mother had taught her, stretching back through generations of women who refused to die quietly. I am the seed. I am the soil. I am the rain that makes things grow. I am the fire that purifies. I am the smoke that rises. I am the ash that feeds the earth. And as I burned, I thought of all the women who would come after. All the mestizas, mulatas, Indias, Españoles, all of us caught in the machinery of men's law, men's God, men's violence. I thought of the recipes they would write, the power they would take, the ways they would survive. The smoke tasted of chocolate and chilies, of blood and ashes, of every meal I'd ever fed my husband, every drop of myself I'd stirred into his food, every spell I'd whispered while he slept. Love magic, they called it, as if love had anything to do with it. This was survival magic. This was rage magic. This was the magic of women who refused to forgive, refused to forget, refused to die without making the world taste their bitterness. And as the flames consumed me, I smiled, because I knew they could burn my body, but they could not burn the recipes. My daughters had them memorized, and their daughters would memorize them, and their daughters after that. The recipe book of María de la Cruz would live forever, passed from hand to hand, tongue to tongue, generation to generation, written in 3 languages, because some knowledge refuses to be confined to one tongue. Hidden in kitchens, whispered in markets, practiced in the dark hours before dawn, when women feed their families and plot their freedom. This is how we survive. This is how we fight. This is how we feed our rage to the men who demand our submission, disguised as sustenance, disguised as love. And when they ask what we have done to them, when they scream that we are witches, that we are demons, we smile, we say nothing, and we keep cooking. Epilogue, 300 years later, in a kitchen in Mexico City, a woman grinds cacao beans under a new moon. Her great-great-great-great-great-grandmother was María de la Cruz, though she doesn't know this. The recipe book was lost to fire and time, but the recipes survived. They always do. She stirs chocolate with honey, whispers words her grandmother taught her, words that taste of smoke and flowers, and something older than the church, older than conquest. Her husband drinks it, grateful. He doesn't ask what's in it. He doesn't need to know. The recipe book of María de la Cruz Cruz lives in her hands, in her grandmother's hands, in the hands of every woman who has ever stood at a stove and remembered she is more powerful than she was told. Magic is just power in different forms, and power, like blood, like memory, like love, enters through the mouth.